First of all, Jake, we want to take the time to welcome you to the Two Man Advantage podcast, and we're excited to talk some NBA basketball with you tonight.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, Jake, when we look at the remainder of the playoffs, certainly the start of the Western Conference Finals last night, the Spurs were up by 25 and they lost the lead and eventually lost the game. And when we look at the Spurs, certainly the injury to Kawhi Leonard will have a major impact on the rest of the playoffs. So I'm just curious to know, what were your overall thoughts as we start the conference finals on headlines for the rest of the playoff season in the NBA?
Well, this question has changed dramatically, obviously, with events that happened with Kawhi Leonard. The number one storyline is his health at this point. Will he be back in time for Game 3? The Spurs have already announced he will miss. It'll be tomorrow night, Tuesday night's Game 2 in Golden State to rest. So he'll have 5 full days to heal up before Game 3. And as we saw last night, on Sunday, the Spurs were up 23 points with Kawhi before he left that game. And they sure look to be in complete control of that contest on both sides of the floor. So his status right now might be one of the most important injuries in recent NBA playoff history. After that, I'm really curious to see if either the Celtics or Wizards can even give the Cavaliers a run at all. They've had slim pickings of any contest throughout the first 2 rounds. I mean, obviously they swept through it. They weren't even they didn't have any game really in doubt against the Raptors, unlike a couple of their close games against the Pacers. I'm still curious to see if the Cavaliers' defense is really legit, because the Raptors' offense that they thwarted in the second round was not very high motion. It was very simplistic. It was a lot of isolation ball. It was pretty easy to defend. So I'm curious to see how that will go against two offenses in Washington and Boston that, while I wouldn't say they're necessarily elite offenses, but they clearly move the ball and play a much more nuanced style and a more modern style of basketball than the Raptors have.
Now, when we look at overall quality of play in terms of the playoffs, how would you describe that, maybe in one word or sentence, and how would you describe the overall quality of play we've seen throughout the duration of the playoffs?
It's been disappointing. I think that's the pretty apt word to describe it. I mean, look at the Rockets specifically in Game 6 against San Antonio. I mean, they fell flat. James Harden, I'm sure we'll talk about him later, that was a very disappointing performance. The Clippers, obviously Blake Griffin got hurt. That was disappointing. Look at the Raptors. I predicted the Raptors to win the Eastern Conference before the playoffs even started. I thought the way they played the last 2 weeks of the regular season was going to be a new brand of Raptors basketball that could really compete with the Cavaliers. And we saw that in Games 5 and the beginning of Game 6 against the Bucks, and it never translated again against the Cavaliers. And the whole overall second round, before the Wizards-Celtics Game 6, every single game was a double-digit blowout. And it's just been there hasn't been that level of drama that's clearly existed in years past.
Now, when we look at the Rockets, you led into my next question in terms of James Harden and the current state of the Rockets with the way they ended Game 5 and certainly not showing up in Game 6. So I'm wondering, what do you think is next for the Rockets after their meltdown in Game 6 against the Spurs?
Well, they talked about it a lot in their kind of post-mortem press conference with Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni the day after, saying that one of James Harden's calling cards for his MVP campaign this year was that he played all 82 games. And rest obviously became a pretty big discussion on a national level this season, with a lot of stars sitting out the second half of back-to-backs, just sitting out games in general, regardless of the schedule, just to kind of give him a rest. And Harden kind of refused to do that. And now they're starting to talk about, maybe resting him a couple nights during the year is valuable for the long run. And I think the Nene injury really devastated them. I'm not sure if we're having this conversation about the Rockets right now. If he wasn't hurt, he was a key factor for the Rockets all season long, coming off the bench in second units and really at times dominating opposing second units inside and really bullying opposing big men in the paint. And he played basically starter minutes. Clint Capella starts for them, but they're playing, if not with Nene having more minutes, they're playing pretty equal minutes. So losing him was just devastating. So I think they'll definitely look to kind of course correct in James Harden's usage. I think they'll try to if they clearly didn't trust Montrezl Harrell in the playoffs, I think they'll try to add some more depth up front, and they're going to have to look for more shooting and more wing defenders to add to their roster because, as we saw against the Spurs, whenever Harden goes to the bench, their defense it's lacking, and they really need to improve their depth there and in the front court.
Now, just one follow-up on the Rockets for you. Do you think Mike D'Antoni's style of offense had anything to do with them and their collapse in Game 6 and the way they play overall? Do you think it's conducive for long playoff runs?
Yeah, we saw it with the Warriors in 2015 and last year as well, how they play a very similar style, launching a lot of three-pointers, and they got to the finals in 2015 and won. They got to the finals last year and it was a Kyrie Irving game winner away from winning that, maybe even a Draymond Green suspension away from winning. The problem is if you're not making shots, that style is not going to be successful. But that's the case in every offensive system. And I think the fact that Mike D'Antoni plays such a brazen style, and that kind of forces that argument to be made because it's more obvious when the shots aren't falling. So I love his style. I think it's a fun way to play. I think the math works out where it happened in Game 4 against the Spurs when the Rockets went up big. When you're trading 3 points for 2, it's pretty easy to win games like that.
Now, when we look at the overall playoff structure itself, were you disappointed or pleasantly surprised at any individual playoff performances throughout the course of the playoffs?
I was. One of my favorite players in the league is Joe Ingles. I think he plays a lot like how I play when I play pickup. He's not exceptionally athletic, but he's bigger for his position. He's like a 6'8", 2-guard, 3-guard wing player. He can shoot the ball as well as anyone in the league. He was 7th in the league this year in three-point shooting, over 40%. He can make plays off the dribble, but he was really called upon this year with this postseason. With Gordon Hayward struggling with a stomach flu, he missed a full game. It was bothering him a lot of that series with Rudy Gobert out. They had to play smaller lineups that shifted him more up a position, so he had to guard multiple players and pick and rolls, and also had to create an offense. And I think he was just terrific, and I think he made himself a lot of money. He's going to be a free agent this summer. And then, again, you go back to Harden, he was disappointing. DeMar DeRozan was really disappointing for me as well. He played, I thought, a very exceptional regular season, and like I mentioned earlier, down the stretch, the Raptors were playing a great team brand of basketball, but when the going got tough and the pace of the game slowed down, he went back into isolation hero ball, and it kind of really hurt the Raptors.
Now, when we look at the Spurs and certainly the Western Conference, and competing against the Warriors will be difficult without both Tony Parker and a healthy Kawhi Leonard. So what do you think is the key for the Spurs to pull the upset against the Warriors?
Well, they need Kawhi back, obviously. And if he comes back, at that point, they need to continue to have their big show up defensively like they did in the beginning of Game 1. Pau Gasol was pretty stellar defensively for his age and his foot speed.
And David Lee played well, too.
David Lee played well. Marcus Aldridge was very active in the pick and roll. That's the key for them. They have the same type of offensive execution as the Warriors, too. I mean, the Spurs I think they had the sixth best offense in terms of efficiency in the regular season. So they're no slouch on offense. It's just about the pace and the speed. And on defense, that's where they really have a disadvantage, because when the Warriors go small, and even when they're big, they're starting five with Draymond Green and a center, or a bench with Draymond Green and JaVale McGee. They're so quick, and they move the ball around within seconds, and they put so much pressure on the rim. And in order to combat that, you really have to have just quick reactions and equal athleticism on your interior defensively. The Spurs don't have that, but if they can execute and they can time it well, and they can rely on their scouting reports and read the Warriors' offense correctly like they did in the beginning of Game 1, they've got a shot.
Now, transitioning to the draft for just a second, what do you think are some headlines you're hearing or buzz around the draft that you think our viewers should know?
Well, obviously, Lonzo Ball is a huge topic of discussion. Everyone I talk to in the league really doesn't care that much about LeVar Ball. They think Lonzo is a tremendous talent. They think he's what he did at UCLA, setting the culture and really creating a linchpin for a style that just fed all these shooters, was pretty instrumental of what he could do for an NBA team. After that, there's not much talk right now about the top guys, because they weren't at the NBA draft combine, and they're kind of out of sight, out of mind for the next couple of days. Once the lottery happens tomorrow, Tuesday night, that's when we'll start hearing a lot more discussion about the top prospects, because we'll have the order in place. It'll start to crystallize who's in which team's range. I was talking to an Eastern Conference team last night, 2 nights ago, a scout from an Eastern Conference team a couple days ago, who was saying, they're in the back of the lottery, and he was saying, we've got the 3 or 4 guys that are going to be in our range that we're deciding on. We got that figured out already. But if we were to jump up in the lottery, then we have to obviously make some tougher decisions. So the lottery is key. And after that, and out of the combine, a lot of people were discussing Hamidou Diallo from Kentucky. He's probably going to end up being a first-round pick. A couple other guys from the combine that stood out was Derek White, Kyle Kuzma. So the talk starts up with the combine like it did last week, and it's really going to ratchet up this week once the lottery happens tomorrow night.
Yeah, I just got one follow-up. We covered the Raptors and the Pistons a lot on the show. I'm just wondering your thoughts on what identity you think the Raptors want to be after being swept out of the playoffs by the Cavaliers, and what do you think the Pistons have to do to get back on track?
So the Raptors, I think Masai Ujiri made it pretty clear in his postseason discussion with the press that they need to play a better style of offense, and I think that's going to start with kind of a philosophy change with how DeMar DeRozan likes to play. I really do. Kyle Lowry is one of the smartest basketball players in the league, and he's a top 6, top 7 point guard. He's capable of playing any style. So I think it's going to be a big philosophical change that happens with Toronto, more so than what happens with their roster and with their manpower. With Detroit, they got to make a lot of changes. Are you a Detroit guy?
Well, we cover the Pistons a lot because we live. Our show is broadcast in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is right across the river from Detroit. So we cover the Pistons a lot.
Yeah. So obviously, Andre Drummond's a really solid piece to build around. He's got his clear prowesses both offensively and defensively. The Pistons organization was very upset with his motor a lot of times this year. It was pretty obvious that he didn't really give a crap defensively a lot. It was hard to yeah, it was hard to motivate him. So that's a big topic of discussion with them. But they're really going to focus on the point guard spot and some wings as well. They've been looking for wings for the last couple of years. And they were deciding between Stanley Johnson and Devin Booker in the 2015 draft, and ultimately took Johnson because they thought he was more ready to go, and they were looking to make the playoffs. They thought they were that close. They went to this year expecting to be a top 4 seed and having a home court advantage in the first round. They didn't make the playoffs, and a lot of that came because of Reggie Jackson. So they're gonna look to move him this offseason. They tried during the trade deadline. They didn't shop him by any means, but they were very active making exploratory calls to see what other teams thought about him and what his value could be around the league. There was talks with the Pelicans that I reported in regards to Drew Holiday. So they're definitely going to be very active this offseason. I don't know if they're going to make a lot of big moves, but they're going to try to pull something here to try to get closer to the postseason. And with all that in mind, they still have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as a restricted free agent too. So it's going to be – they have a very interesting offseason ahead of them.
And with them moving into the new arena, they'll have to sell some tickets too. So
Absolutely.
It'll be interesting. Just one other question about the draft. Do you think LeVar Ball will be a hindrance to his son as he continues to go through this draft process and throughout his career as well?
I don't think so, and it's for 2 reasons. The first reason is Lonzo Ball is a top 3 pick because of how his dad trained him. He got them playing the style of play that you saw Lonzo thrive in UCLA from a very young age. He taught them their basketball philosophy of sharing the ball, pushing the pace the style that we see a lot of NBA teams playing right now. So a guy, no matter what he says off the court, the fact that he imprinted the way Lonzo plays within him, to me, is enough to show how much he does get it, regardless of your opinion of his off-court antics. And the second thing is he's got 2 more sons he has to do this to. He has to do this for as well. And LiAngelo, who's going to be a freshman at UCLA next year, is a pretty elite shooter, but he's nowhere near the quality of prospect that Lonzo is. So he's going to have his work cut out for him even more to try to get LiAngelo in the same eye that Lonzo is in right now. And that's going to require a lot more attention and effort from him than it is to be pestering some NBA team to get Lonzo some more minutes. So I think I'm not worried about it. Regardless, I think he's harmless. I think he's a fun pop culture figure. There's not much a parent can really do in the scheme of an overall NBA organization. But I think even if people are worried about him, the fact that what he's done really did set the stage for Lonzo to get here in the first place. And the second factor, that he's got 2 more sons he has to also focus on and try to help them get to the NBA and make their signature shoes and get them endorsement deals. It's not going to be an issue, in my opinion.
Well, as a reporter, he'll give you some interesting headlines to write anyway.
Exactly. I'm going to be visiting them in a couple weeks actually for the magazine, so it should be interesting.
When we look at the Eastern Conference Finals, obviously Game 7 between Washington and the Celtics this tonight. So what do you think would be the more compelling and watchable matchup for the Cavaliers? What do you think would give them the greater challenge, Washington or Boston?
It's tough. I think overall the Celtics probably match up with the Cavs better because they're deep and they can keep throwing wings at LeBron to try to slow him down. And they've got Avery Bradley, who's probably the most optimal defender to combat Kyrie Irving in the entire NBA. However, I think the Wizards starting lineup is far more potent than the Celtics starting lineup. And I think the Wizards' best 5 compared to the Cavs' best 5, I think the Wizards would present I think the Wizards' best 5 presents a tougher challenge for the Cavs' best 5 than the Celtics' best 5 does. So to me, overall, I think the Celtics would provide a tougher task for Cleveland. But in terms of like a fourth quarter battle and a close game, I think the Wizards are probably the stingier opponent because John Wall is going to be a freight train coming at Kyrie Irving full speed. They're going to have they're going to have to make a decision. Who's LeBron going to cover? Is LeBron going to stay on Markieff Morris? Is he going to shift off to stop Beal or John Wall? Marcin Gortat is enough of a body to kind of neutralize Tristan Thompson. Markieff Morris on the other end is an athletic enough defender to bang with Kevin Love inside and also compete with him on the perimeter. And Otto Porter's no slouch defensively too. It's going to take a lot of people to slow LeBron, but they've got, just like the Celtics do, they've got Kelly Oubre Jr., they've got Otto Porter, they've got Markieff Morris to kind of, and even Bradley Beal can spend some minutes. You need at least 4 guys to rotate on LeBron and try to slow him down. And they've got the pieces to do that too. It's just they don't have nearly as much depth as the Celtics do.
What do you think is going to happen tonight in Game 7 in Boston?
It's tough to pick against Boston at home with Isaiah Thomas and the feeling the story he's playing with right now, playing for his sister who recently passed, unfortunately. But I'm going to take the Wizards. I think the Wizards are better. I think the Wizards should have swept this series. They had a 22-0 lead in Game 1. They had Bradley Beal with an 18-footer at the top of the key to win it in Game 2. They easily could have won this series 4-0. So I think the Wizards are the better team, and I'm going to pick them. What about you?
Boston's pretty tough at home. They're the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. But I wouldn't be surprised if Washington wins. I just think Boston, since they have the home court advantage, that will be the deciding factor tonight. But it should be a good game. My final question for you has to do with the offseason in terms of both LA teams. Both of those teams could look drastically different come next season. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on both LA teams and any other offseason news you'll be keeping a close eye on this offseason.
Well, both LA teams, obviously, it starts with the lottery for the Lakers. They could easily get the number 1 pick. They could easily lose a pick to the Sixers. And if they lose a pick to the Sixers, they then also lose their 2018 pick as well. So that's going to be tough if they don't have another top pick here to kind of keep rebuilding, because it's going to be really tough to draw a free agent to Los Angeles to play with the current crop of young guys they have right now. So it starts with them for that. I mean, if they do get a top 3 pick, all eyes are on them looking to get Lonzo Ball. That's where it starts. And then for the Clippers, I think JJ Redick's gone. I think he's going to cash in on a nice big contract. And I think Blake Griffin might be gone too. I think we could really see a situation where Blake Griffin leaves and the Clippers are left trading for Carmelo Anthony, and they kind of retinker to a new big 3.
And are there any other headlines throughout the offseason you'll be keeping an eye on, or no?
Yeah. What do the Sixers do? I mean, they've been building to try to compete for 3 years now. I grew up rooting for them.
Losing picks if you're not going to win. That's right.
Exactly. So, I mean, the other side of the Lakers thing is that if the Lakers lose their pick, it's because it goes to Philly. And the Sixers could have the first and 4th overall picks this year. If that's the case, if they don't get the first pick, if they just get 2 top 7 picks, because they also have a swap with the Kings. If they get 2 picks, do they trade one of them to get an established piece? Do they trade both to try to go for a Jimmy Butler or a Paul George? That they have the pieces to make some moves this offseason, just like anyone else. I'm really curious to see what direction they go.
Fantastic, Jake. We want to take the time to thank you for your insight and perspective on the NBA playoffs and news around the league. And thank you for joining us tonight on the Two Man Advantage podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I was happy to be here.
Have a great day, and thanks for your time, bud.
Thank you.